well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Welcome to another edition of Bearing Arms, Cam and Company. My name is Cam Edwards. I'm glad you're with us on the program today. It's been a couple of days. It's been an eventful couple of days. You know, I was down in Houston, Texas for the NRA annual meeting. We'll be continuing to cover that, by the way, at Bearing Arms. Hope you enjoyed the coverage over the weekend. I have to say, you know, the protests outside of the NRA dwindled over the course of the weekend. I actually did see some conversations taking place between gun owners and gun control advocates far away from the media cameras. There were a couple of conversations that were happening, but for the most part, there's a lot of screaming on the part of gun control activists, blaming NRA members for the horrific tragedy in Uvalde, Texas, in which 19 children were killed, as well as 2 teachers, multiple others injured. And of course, the conversations continue virtually this week, not on Capitol Hill, but virtually among a group of Republican and Democrat senators who are looking to find some sort of policy solution that they can then bring to the table and maybe cobble together 60 votes for passage next week when the Senate ends its Memorial Day recess. Now, on today's program, we're going to be talking with Ryan Petty, whose daughter Alaina was murdered at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida in 2018. You might have seen Ryan call a gun control activist David Hogg a charlatan over the weekend for what he said was rewriting the history around the legislative response in Florida post-Parkland. That legislative response included, you know, raising the age to buy a so-called assault rifle or assault weapon to 21, as well as imposing a red flag legislation in Florida. And according to David Hogg, that was because Republicans were willing to come to the table with groups like March for Our Lives. Ryan Petty says, no, actually, March for Our Lives was an impediment to the legislative process, not a help to the legislative process because, well, I don't want to put words in Ryan's mouth. I'm going to let you hear what he has to say about how that went down in Florida and why Ryan doesn't believe that Congress should be passing any new gun control legislation. Take a look and a listen.
I've held my tongue for 4 years, but the events of last week in Uvalde, Texas, and let me just say my heart is breaking. The more we learn about what happened and what didn't happen, what should have happened, and my heart goes out to those families. Unfortunately, I know what they're going through, and I wish that we could have been more effective in encouraging cities and counties and law enforcement around the country to take this threat seriously. But specifically on this topic, I'm angry. I'm angry because of the failures, and I'm angry because once again, after a tragedy, some groups decide that it's a good time to start fundraising off of tragedy, and they want to start doing, you know, marches and protests, and it's really all about raising money. And it was bad enough, the money that was raised on the Parkland tragedy, on the loss of my daughter and 16 others. I just couldn't take it anymore. We just cannot and should not allow these guys to raise money off a tragedy. And I've had enough. It was time to set the record straight about what happened in Parkland and what happened after Parkland. I think there have been a number of journalists that have weighed in, that were there, that saw what happened after Parkland and can attest to my version of events, which is that it was largely because of the parents and the families of the victims that we got the Marjory Stoneman Douglas law passed. And it was actually made more difficult because the March for Our Lives students went up there with a group of well-funded, well-organized, who's who on the left, went up there and actually poisoned the well, Cam. They went up there and just, you know, there's the pictures of them talking with legislators and carrying their signs, and that was part of it. But the other part of it was demanding entry into offices and demanding that they ban assault weapons and demanding, you know, their list of gun control, their prescription, which was only gun control. And it really set us back. And so it was even more difficult for the families to advocate for some changes in Florida. And some of those changes, I'll admit, Cam, are not popular with your audience. I understand that. We raised the age to buy a rifle in the state of Florida from 18 to 21. Not popular, I get it. And we implemented red flag laws here. But that was sort of secondary to the real changes we made, which was to really elevate school safety in the state of Florida. And that was really what the Parkland bill was about. It had really almost nothing to do with gun control.
Well, and I would say too that listen, this is a part of the legislative process, and nobody, I think, is ever going to get their way 100% of the time. So those folks who disagree, for example, with the raising the age limit, that's been challenged in court. That lawsuit is underway. We've seen similar challenges to gun bans for under 21s. The Ninth Circuit actually recently ruled that California's law banning the sale of so-called assault weapons to 18, 19, and 20-year-olds is unconstitutional. So for folks who don't like these gun control measures or the gun control aspects of what you did in Florida, there is a mechanism by which those laws can be challenged. And you and I have had, conversations before about the red flag laws and we have a difference of opinion on those. But you and I have also been able to sit down and have these conversations about what really works. And as you say, the emphasis on school security, on the Guardian program, making sure that there is an armed response, that's a part of the conversation too. And it seems to me like what we're seeing right now in Congress is, again, this sort of myopic focus on the gun, right? So we're hearing, about talks about maybe possibly trying to expand background checks in some way, even though the killer in Uvalde passed a background check. We're hearing about, it sounds at this point like the focus may be on, providing grants to states to establish red flag laws. But I'm not hearing a lot of talk right now, Ryan, about, again, improving school security or improving officer response to shootings like this. I mean, again, in Parkland and in Uvalde, what we saw were that minutes were wasted waiting for those officers to go in to take on that shooter and to save lives.
Yeah, what that says to me is that we need, we spent 2 years now with the same group on the left, right? They're all one big amorphous group, but the same folks out screaming, defund the police, defund the police. So what does that mean? That means the law enforcement doesn't have the equipment or the training necessary to do the job, right? And so we saw this in Uvalde. Now there's more to come out. There's investigation. It took us a year to get our first report out, almost a year after Parkland. So we need to give the authorities time to investigate. But it looks like lack of equipment and lack of training, and there may be some other elements that I'll reserve judgment on that caused that here. But it's these same groups yelling for, defund the police that are causing the problem, right? Number one. Number two, let me address we'll never know exactly why the attacker chose that Robb Elementary School, but my guess is because he knew there would be no armed resistance there, because in the Uvalde Independent School District, they didn't put an armed presence at the elementary schools. They had them at the secondary schools. That's unfortunate. In the state of Florida, we've chosen to protect all of our schools. And let me be clear about what's going on at the federal level. I said this when I testified to the Senate Judiciary Committee after Parkland. I don't believe the answers can be found within the chamber I was sitting in. There's nothing at the federal level that they're going to do short of banning all firearms, right, and confiscating them, that would make any difference. And that is simply not on the table. It's simply not possible. And it wouldn't work anyway because criminals don't obey laws, right? So just a reminder for everyone in the audience, there hasn't been a school attack in the last 20 years where a background check would have made a difference, right? All of these attackers passed a background check, or the person they got the gun from, usually a parent, passed a background check. Background checks will not stop these school attacks. There are things that will, but because see, this is my problem with what March for Our Lives did. They make this all about gun control, and it literally sucks the oxygen out of the room. So you can't have a conversation about pragmatic, practical solutions that will work.
I agree with you 100%. And I have to say, I mean, as somebody who is in the room down in Florida, tell me about how that process worked. And did it ever get to a point down there where you thought, oh my gosh, we're putting politics ahead of policy? Because I see that taking place in DC right now. This is an election year. Democrats obviously want to make gun control a campaign issue. I think that there are some Republicans who maybe genuinely are looking for some sort of federal legislation that they think could make a difference. But I suspect that there are also some Republicans who are saying, listen, we can't be seen as doing nothing when people are asking us to do something. And I don't think that politics should be the driving factor here. I think we actually need to be putting policy first, and politics needs to be a non-issue. Although I know that's not going to happen because it's the politicians who are sitting at the table and crafting their do something solution.
Yeah, what we did that was different here in Florida, and I give our then Governor Scott a lot of credit for this. He convened a panel of experts from multiple disciplines, and he said, I want solutions that will work. And, some of that did include raising the age to 21. And there were some reasons why those experts recommended that. But most of it had to do with making sure our schools are not soft targets, making sure the simple things like locking gates, locking doors are done, making sure our kids and our student and our teachers and staff know what to do in case of an emergency. And then funding school safety at a level that and keeping a focus on it that we had not had previously to Parkland. But none of those things get the conversation going in at the federal level because you've got one side screaming loudly, right, for the one thing that they want, which is to control, to control guns, right? They don't like the idea that you and I are armed. They don't like the idea that we can go to the store and pass a background check and purchase a firearm. They don't like that. So they want to tell us how to live. And law-abiding gun owners, again, are not the problem here. And so the solutions they put forward have really little to do with making schools safer, and they have everything to do with restricting our freedoms and making us or forcing us to live the way they want us to live.
All right, now I'm going to play devil's advocate for a second here because you just said that law-abiding gun owners are not the problem, but you also pointed out that over the last 20 years, virtually every one of these school shooters either passed a background check themselves or they got their gun from somebody who passed a background check, right? So the gun control advocates would say, aha, Ryan, that does show that law-abiding gun owners are at least have to be included in our policy discussions because we are seeing people who are law-abiding up until the point they decide to start murdering innocent people. Is it your opinion that in these cases that we've seen, these folks who were able to pass a background check also typically had red flags in their past that had gone unaddressed, that if the system had worked the way we think it's supposed to work, that they either would have been prohibited from purchasing a firearm or they would not have been able to get their hands on one legally?
Yeah, and we're seeing some. I've heard some early reporting about this killer in Uvalde that apparently had been making threats for some time, and none of that had been put on a record, and none of that had been prevented him from passing a background check. Look, background checks are absolutely worthless if you're not including the information in the if there's no record that would prevent you from purchasing a firearm. And again, once again, there were warning signs. Now, we don't know all of the details yet. I was convinced from the beginning that there were warning signs. It looked initially like maybe he had only communicated the threat 30 minutes before the attack began. But now we're starting to see the same thing we see every time, which is there were warning signs. They were not heeded, and therefore there was no problem passing a background check. So we've got to start taking these threats seriously. One of the things we've done in Florida, there were 2 reports. I get an email every morning from the Department of Education that talks about safe schools. 2 more instances in the state of Florida just this week where students or teenagers threatened schools in the state of Florida, and we take those seriously. Both were arrested, both were charged with felonies, and both will have to answer for the threats that they made. But we're taking those seriously. They will have a record, and they will have difficulty passing a background check if they're found guilty.
Which again, very much is taking this seriously. I guess my concern is that, and tell me if I'm wrong, in Florida, do you think that would have been the case, let's say, if this had happened in September, if a 10-year-old had said, the first week going back to school, I'm going to go shoot up a school, would the response have been that serious, or is some of that response because we are so close to the Uvalde shooting, or is it really working well in Florida, addressing these threats seriously when they come up?
Yeah, I think the Florida law enforcement is taking this seriously. And I think, quite honestly, the school districts, for the most part, are taking this seriously, or at least sharing information with law enforcement, which was not happening prior to Parkland. So are we perfect? Absolutely not. Are there opportunities, gaps, and holes and places we need to improve? Absolutely, 100%. Could it happen in Florida? Yes, it could still happen in Florida, but are we doing better than we were? Yes, we are, because we're taking these seriously. Now, after any attack, vigilance increases. Parents now who were not concerned, because Parkland was 4 years ago and hadn't really seen one of these attacks on the scale of a Parkland or Uvalde or Sandy Hook, they're now concerned again. So I'm getting emails and requests on social media. What do we do? What can we do to keep our kids safe? So vigilance is up. That's good. But my heart breaks because it shouldn't take a tragedy for us to take these things seriously. And no one should be making a threat against a school. I think that should be prosecuted. It's up to each state to decide whether that's a felony, a misdemeanor, what level of everybody can decide. Each state can decide what that should mean. In Florida, we take them seriously. And if you communicate a threat in the state of Florida, you're going to have a record.
If you were at that table, or I guess the virtual table right now, with the Republican and Democratic senators who are trying to find, some sort of compromise language, what would you tell them? Where would you tell them to start looking, and what would you tell them would be the most effective thing that they specifically could do at the federal level?
Yeah. So what I would do, and what I've told a couple of our senators privately, is, first of all, do not cave in. The desire to do something, the unintended consequences of doing anything or doing something are often worse than just doing nothing, quite frankly. And so I've urged them to do nothing at this point, because there aren't any proposals on the table that would matter in my mind. Now, there are things they could be doing. There's an act that's been sitting there since Parkland called the Eagles Act that expands the funding for the National Threat Assessment Center at the Secret Service, who study these attacks, publish fantastic research, and train school districts and law enforcement for free on how to identify threats and what to do about those. That would be incredibly helpful, because imagine if the Uvalde School District had understood and taken action on the threats that this killer had made previously that we're just learning about. If they'd taken those seriously and done something about them, this tragedy might have been prevented before he even got to the unlocked school door.
And as you say, that's just sitting there in Congress, not moving at all.
Senator Grassley's had it on. I mean, I went up there to help try to get it passed right after Parkland. It just sits there because it's not popular with one side of the aisle, and they just only want to pass gun control. So they won't consider a bill that would actually improve school safety until they get what they want, which are universal background checks or an assault weapons ban.
Again, politics over policy. Ryan Petty, listen, I appreciate you so much. Thank you for coming on the program, and I hope we get a chance to do this again very soon.
Thank you for having me, Cam.
I appreciate Ryan joining us on the program, and I would like to have Ryan back at some point to talk about red flag laws, and maybe even delve a little bit deeper into the idea of these gun bans for under 21s. But as I said, there are ways to challenge those laws, and in fact, I think that given what we've seen in the Ninth Circuit, and frankly, given what we've even seen in the 11th Circuit in the Florida case in particular, there are legitimate constitutional concerns over banning sales of long guns or of the most commonly sold rifle in America to adults under the age of 21. Those issues, I think, should be addressed legislatively in terms of knocking down those bad bills before they become law, but at least we can challenge those laws in court. What we're seeing right now from Congress, again, I think are efforts that don't get us any closer to actually preventing these types of attacks. And actually, in many cases, I think get us further away from these substantive issues that we do need to be talking about, ranging from school security to, as Ryan talked about, the mental health aspect and the mental health component to virtually every one of these targeted attacks on our schools over the past couple of decades. Right now, though, let's turn our attention to today's armed citizen story, our recidivist report, our good deed of the day. We'll start with our recidivist report from Chicago, Illinois. 5 months after escaping from electronic monitoring, he helped shoot up a carload of people, injuring 2. According to prosecutors, that from the website CWB Chicago. Talking about a guy named Luis Molina Jr., who is a twice convicted criminal who escaped from electronic monitoring last September and then remained on the run until mid-April of this year, according to prosecutors and court records. 5 days before he was arrested in April, Molina and 4-time felon Hector Rivera, according to CWB Chicago, allegedly opened fire on a carload of people outside of a liquor store. 2 people were shot. Now, CWB Chicago notes that Molina is the 21st person accused of killing or shooting or trying to shoot or kill someone in Chicago this year while awaiting trial for a felony. 49 victims in those cases, 11 of whom died. Rivera, also awaiting trial on a felony case. This was actually his 3rd felon in possession case. He is the 15th person charged with killing or shooting or trying to shoot or kill someone in Chicago this year while awaiting trial for a felony. According to CWB Chicago, Molina's case shows that Judge Charles Burns sentenced him to 27 months for possessing a stolen firearm in 2017. Now that, again, a felony crime. But when cops caught him, again, in illegal possession of a firearm in May of 2020, prosecutors only charged him with a misdemeanor. He ended up taking a guilty plea in December of that year, and the judge sentenced him to just 1 day in jail, which was basically negated by the 1 day that he spent in custody after he was arrested. 5 months later, May 23rd, 2021, according to CWB Chicago, a Chicago police officer watching surveillance camera feeds saw a man holding a gun in the middle of the road, 18th Street, or 18th Place, rather. Patrol officers went to the scene. They saw Molina walk to the back of a truck, place something inside, turned out to be a gun. They arrested him. This is now, again, the 3rd case. Judge Charles Beach set bail conditions that allowed Molina to go home on electronic monitoring. All he had to do was pay a $1,000 bail deposit. 4 months later, he stopped showing up for court. Judge issues an arrest warrant. Prosecutors file charges for escape from electronic monitoring. And then again, he's allegedly responsible for a shooting 5 days before he was taken into custody. He was indicted by a grand jury on May 11th of 15 counts of attempted murder, 2 rounds of aggravated battery by discharging a fireman, 3 counts of aggravated discharge of a fireman to an occupied vehicle for that case. And he is now being held without bail, but only now is he being held without bail. Up until then, slap on the wrist, even if you're a felon in possession of a firearm. So again, when we hear people talk about, well, if we only had more laws on the books, And you hear gun owners talk about enforcing the existing laws in the books. This is exactly what we're talking about here, right? These were crimes for which Alaina would have been eligible for at least 5 years in prison. And instead, prosecutors in this case plea bargain him down to a misdemeanor. He gets a day in jail. Clearly, that didn't make much of an impression on him, or actually, maybe it did make an impression on him, because the next time he gets arrested, illegally possessing a firearm, and he's allowed to walk out on electronic monitoring, he just decides, whatever, they're not going to come after me, or they're not going to find me. And for months and for months and for months, that was the case. Again, while he was allegedly committing more violent crimes. Today's armed citizen story from Webster, Texas, where police say a woman shot a man to death after he broke into an apartment. This was about 9 p.m. Monday night on the Gulf Freeway. Police say that they believe that the woman inside the apartment was defending herself as well as children when she shot the man who broke down her front door. There were several people inside the apartment along with the woman, including several kids. Officer said she fired one shot as the guy broke down her door. Lieutenant J.P. Horelka of the Webster PD said he forced entry through the front door. Don't have information on whether he kicked it or how he opened it, but he did break the front door frame, got the door completely open, and entered the location. Police say they're still investigating the relationship between the man and woman. But again, at this point, they say that they believe that this woman was acting in self-defense when she shot and killed the man who broke through her front door. And finally today, our good deed of the day, Louisville, Kentucky, where police say a good Samaritan came to the aid of a woman who was being raped in a park. Police arrested 41-year-old Lamario Averhart back on May 13th in Indianapolis for first-degree rape that, again, took place in Louisville, Kentucky. Lindsay Lynch, who is with the sex crimes unit of the Louisville Police Department, said that she is incredibly grateful for the actions of the Good Samaritan who, quote, came to her rescue, because she's at least here to talk about it. I think that's the main thing she keeps focusing on to get her through this. According to Detective Lynch, the woman met Averhart at a bar on the night of the Kentucky Derby. She said they ended up talking and hanging out the whole night. They left together. They were going to go to another location, and then they went by the park because he told her that's where he liked to go to clear his head. Instead, he sexually assaulted her. It was about 7 a.m., broad daylight, and somebody who was walking by saw what was happening and actually confronted Averhart. Detective Lynch says they were on the ground. The sexual assault was occurring. He got in between. There was a vehicle that they had come to the park, and he got in between the vehicle and the suspect and actually was like, I don't know what's happening here, but I'm going to have to take these keys out of the car because the keys were still in the vehicle, so then the suspect couldn't leave. Lynch said the Good Samaritan and Averhart physically fought over the keys before Averhart took off. The Good Samaritan chased him for several blocks, but even after he got away, he had done enough to save the woman and help police arrest Averhart again days later in Indianapolis. Detective Lynch said, quote, not only was it crucial if he had gotten back in the car wasn't his. There were so many things that we might not have known if he had not intervened. And she said that she hopes this incident serves as a message to the community to help when they can. Again, I can't disagree. If you do see something and you are in a position to act, you should. But again, I think this is also an argument for those Good Samaritans out there to be able to protect themselves. We don't know what would have happened had Averhart been armed. That Good Samaritan, if he were not prepared to protect and defend himself, very well could have ended up as a victim as well. We absolutely need to be looking out for each other, but we also need to be looking out for ourselves, and we need to be able to protect and defend ourselves against those who would harm us, strangers, or the ones that we love. Now, that is going to do it for this edition of Bearing Arms Cam and Company. I want to thank you for being a part of the program. As always, we'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Bearing Arms Cam and Company. In the meantime, be sure to check out BearingArms.com throughout the day for even more Second Amendment news and information that you need to know about. If you like what you see, you can always become a VIP subscriber. Just use the promo code GUNRIGHTS when you go to BearingArms.com/subscribe. As our way of saying thanks for showing your support for the independent pro-Second Amendment journalism we're doing at Bearing Arms. We're going to give you exclusive analysis, news story, stuff you won't get anywhere else, because your support does matter and does make a difference. Thanks again. We'll be back tomorrow, but until then, be well, be safe, and be free.